continuing right along. So now we finished. We're learning about, as we said, the laws of Eretz Yisrael. We learned about the sacrifices and the gifts that go with them, which will happen when the Jews conquer and settle in the land of Israel, because they weren't able to go. So Hashem is giving them at least the mitzvahs that's going to take place. And now he's going to teach you the famous mitzvah of challah that also takes place as soon as the Jews enter Israel, even actually before they conquer it and they settle it, they're going to immediately as they enter, if you want to make bread, you have to give challah, a donation to the kohen of challah. Today we just burn it in the oven, but in the olden days, you'd actually have to give the first of every batch of challah that they make. They have to give it to the kohen. Let's see. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, speak to the Jewish people and say to them, when the Jewish people come to the land of Israel, as soon as you enter the land of Israel, unlike the other mitzvahs that a lot of the mitzvahs are not as soon as you enter the land of Israel. They took 14 years for them to conquer it and settle there. A lot of the other mitzvahs were not applicable until they actually lived there, settled there. This mitzvah of challah, as soon as you enter, you have to do the mitzvah of challah. Verse 19, when you're going to eat the bread of the land, you should give a portion of it as a gift to Hashem. Give some of that challah to God. Because we always have all these little donations. You got to give this donation to the kohen, this donation to the Levi. When you make a batch of challah, take off a piece of it and give it to Hashem. The first portion of your dough, before you eat it, you take off challah for the kohen. You separate the challah for the kohen. What kind of donation should it be? So there's two options how this donation could go. It could be like the donation, the truma we give to the kohen, which God does not tell you how much you should give. Or it could be like the truma to the meiser, the tithe to the Levi, which is a very specific number of how much you should give, and that's 10%. So is this challah donation like the kohen, which you give however much you want? Or is this challah donation like the Levi, which you have to give 1/10 of the dough to the Levi? And another thing is, how much dough do you have to make to give challah? If you make a little tiny challah, do you have to give, or is there a large enough measurement? So Rashi explains to us both of those explanations, what the Torah is saying. You don't have to give challah unless you make a large enough dough. If you make a little tiny batch of dough, you don't have to give challah from that. I think today they do it by maybe 5-pound bags. If you want to make a bracha and you want to make sure that you're not making a blessing in vain, the people, I think they make it over a 5-pound bag of flour. I'm not sure, I'm guessing over here, but I believe that's the case. In the numbers in the days of the desert was 43 eggs. So the average standard dough baking session in the desert, if you were making yourself dough, you would make a size that is about 43, which is called an omer, which is 43 eggs. So whenever you make a 43 egg size piece of dough, you're commanded to remove from it challah. How much challah should you give? It's up to you. It's like the truma that you give to the kohen. We're not telling you, Hashem says how much you should give. You decide how much you should give. However, the rabbis gave a number to help you out. How much should it be? And they said, well, if you're a homeowner, you should give 1/24 of the dough. If you're a business owner making, you own a shop which makes dough for baking, if you're a larger commercial, you could give 1/48 of the dough as a donation to the kohen. Every generation, the first of the challah that you give, not the first whole batch, Rashi's explaining. Every time you make a whole batch, you got to give the first of the dough to Hashem and not to the fire, not burning it, right? Some of the stuff we burn on the altar, this is not being burnt on the altar. This is going to the kohen. Today, there's a very high level of holiness if we give it to the kohen. So what we simply do is we burn it in the oven not to have problems with the going to the mikveh, whatever else you have to do to make sure you're eating in the right state. So we just burn it in the oven. We this part of sacrifices we actually do even today. Now he goes on to say about different sins that are done. We're going to see about Avodah Zarah, about idol worship, and he's going to share the 3 big sins that he says are denying the whole Torah, and it's connected to. I'm not sure actually. We're going to see about it. Why he brings it up now, I forget. I saw why, but I forget. God forbid if a Jew now sins, he's talking about idolatry, sins with serving idols. That God spoke to Moshe, not that to tell the Jews obviously not to sin with idol worship. And he says, if you do idol worship, it's like you're violating the whole Torah, because a Jew who takes off the yoke of the whole Torah, he's not listening to Hashem, and he's not listening to Moshe, and he's ignoring what God says, doesn't care about God. When you serve idols, that's exactly what you're doing. That's one sin you can do, which is the same similar thing to denying the entire Torah and denying Hashem completely. And this, as Rashi says, the idolatry prohibition, we heard directly from Hashem, because if you remember the story when we read about in the Torah about Mount Sinai experience, God himself said the first two straight out, and the Jewish people after heard the first two commandments said, please, Moses, you interpret for us, you tell us what God is saying. But the first two are believe in God and don't have idols. So God forbid if a Jew throws down Hashem, ignores God, embarrassed, goes against Hashem, and as called Hashem Moshe, and all the commandments, it's as if he violated all the commandments that Hashem gave Moshe. On the day that Hashem commanded you till today, that's a sin. You're ignoring everything that Hashem told you from the beginning until today by doing idolatry. And he does it. And why did he do idolatry? Either it could be, he says, an interesting case that the Beth Din said this is allowed, whatever they wanted to do. And the community all did it, and they found out that they made a mistake. It was idolatry that they did. And if it was the eyes of the congregation, they were misled by the Beth Din. And they did it. And then the whole congregation should bring a bull, sacrifice as a burnt offering, as a peace offering smelling to Hashem. And with that burnt offering, as we were talking about sacrifices in Israel, you should bring with that young bull, you should bring the libations that come along with it, and the meal offering that comes, give mishpat, usiris and mechatas, and then follow up the elevation burnt offering with a sin offering. And Rashi says there's something very interesting over here. Usually when you want to do it, when you did a sin, you first bring the sin offering, and then you bring the elevation offering. Why? Because you first ask forgiveness, and then you bring the gift. But it's for some reason, it's interesting here that we're flipping it. You're first bringing the elevation offering, and then you follow up. You first bring the gift, and then you follow up with the sin offering. For whatever reason, it's flipped. The Kohen will bring forgiveness for the entire congregation that sinned. And they will be forgiven. Because it was a mistake. In other words, it wasn't intentional. The Haim as Karban, they'll bring their sacrifice to Hashem, that they sinned before Hashem. And it's like a large animal. The community sinned, and they sinned with idolatry, which is the most great sin, but it was a mistake. And therefore, if a person sins, it's okay. If it was by accident, as long as they ask forgiveness and they bring us a gift to Hashem, and the entire congregation will be forgiven, including the converts amongst them, because in all the people it was a mistake. It wasn't serious, and even though everybody did the same sin, it was by accident, and therefore they will be forgiven for their sins that they did. That is the end of today's Chumash. Tomorrow,